At 8:07 on a freezing October morning, my daughter-in-law kicked off her mud-covered heels in the kitchen and shoved them toward me. "Clean them before we leave," she said, without even looking at my face. I stood there in silence until my son walked in, glanced at the shoes, then looked me straight in the eyes. "Dad, you're going to apologize to my wife right now or pack your suitcase and get out." I smiled, picked up the suitcase I had packed 5 days earlier, and quietly walked out the front door. 1 week later, my phone showed 30 missed calls. Before we go any further, I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Tell me in the comments, what country or city are you watching from? I'd love to know where this story is finding you. A quick note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is entirely coincidental, but every lesson inside it is worth carrying with you. The morning I decided to leave the kitchen smelled like burnt toast and old resentment. I had been standing at the counter since 6, the way I always did, cracking 2 eggs into the cast iron pan my late wife Margaret had brought home from a yard sale in 1987. The grease popped and hissed. Sunlight came through the bay window in long gold stripes across the hardwood floor, the same floor I had refinished with my own hands back when this house still felt like a home. Then Claire walked in. She was wearing a silk robe the color of champagne, her hair pinned up, a phone already in her hand. She didn't say good morning. She never did. She moved through the kitchen like I was a piece of furniture, something to step around, not to acknowledge. She poured herself a glass of juice from the pitcher I had freshly squeezed, took 1 sip, wrinkled her nose, and set it down without a word. I kept my eyes on the eggs. Then I heard the sharp clack of heels against marble, her going-out shoes, the tall black ones she wore to her social lunches. She came back into the kitchen and stopped right behind me. I heard a soft thud. I turned around. She had dropped both shoes onto the floor in front of me, the soles facing up, caked with dried mud from wherever she had been last night. She looked at me the way a hotel guest looks at a bellhop who is taking too long. "The soles are filthy," she said. "Get to it before I leave." My hand tightened around the spatula. Something moved through my chest, not anger exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been building for 2 years and 11 months in this house, in this kitchen, in this life that no longer resembled anything I had built. I set the spatula down. I turned to face her fully. And I said nothing. Claire raised 1 perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Did you not hear me?" "I heard you," I said. I heard every word. She tilted her head, the phone still in her hand, her expression somewhere between amusement and irritation. "Then what are you waiting for? I have a brunch at 11. Before I could respond, Daniel came down the stairs. My son, 42 years old, wearing a pressed linen shirt at 8 in the morning, like he had somewhere important to be, which he didn't. He had been between projects for 3 months. His agency gigs had dried up. But he still carried himself like a man at the top of the world, and that posture, that borrowed confidence, had always been the thing that broke my heart the most. He looked at the shoes on the floor. He looked at me. Something shifted behind his eyes. Something calculating. Something I recognized as the version of Daniel I had never wanted him to become. "Dad," he said. His voice was careful, pleasant in the way a razor is pleasant before you realize it's cutting you. "Claire asked you something." "I know what Claire asked." "Then why are you making this difficult?" He crossed his arms. "It's just shoes. You're home all day. We go out and we work. The least you can do is help around the house. Help around the house." I repeated the words slowly, tasting each one. "Is that what this is?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He walked closer, stopping 2 feet from me. Up close, I could see the tension in his neck, the way his shoulders had drawn up near his ears. He was embarrassed not by Claire's request, but by my refusal. My refusal made him feel small in front of his wife, and Daniel could not tolerate feeling small. "I'm going to say this once," he said, and his voice had dropped to something low and deliberate. Either you get down on your knees right now and apologize to Claire for disrespecting her, or you get out of my house." The kitchen went very quiet. My heart did not pound. My hands did not shake. I had lived 72 years on this earth. I had buried a wife. I had built a company from a single mechanic's bay to a real estate trust worth more than Daniel could count. I had weathered things that would have destroyed men half my age. And now my son, my blood, was standing in my kitchen asking me to kneel. "Your house," I said. "That's right." I looked at him for the long moment. Not with hatred. With something closer to grief, the kind that doesn't burn but settles heavy in the bones. "All right, Daniel," I said. "All right." I walked past him. I walked past Claire, who was already lifting her phone to tap something on the screen. I walked down the hall to the bedroom at the end of the corridor, the smallest room in the house, the one I had been given when I moved in, the one with the window that faced the alley instead of the garden. I opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind a spare blanket, sat a dark leather suitcase. I had packed it 5 days ago. Not impulsively, methodically. 3 suits, 2 pairs of shoes, Margaret's photograph in a velvet frame, the small Bible she had given me on our wedding day, a single folder of documents I would need. I had known this moment was coming. I had simply been waiting to see how it would arrive. I lifted the suitcase from the shelf, set it on the bed, checked the zipper one final time, and picked it up. Walking back through the hallway, I passed the wall of family photographs, Daniel at his college graduation, Daniel and Claire at their wedding, Daniel laughing at some long-ago Christmas. My face was in almost none of them. I had always been the one behind the camera. I stepped into the foyer. Claire was in the living room now, phone held up, filming something. Daniel stood by the bottom of the stairs with his arms crossed, watching me the way a man watches someone he expects to back down. I did not back down. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door, put it on slowly, and smoothed the lapels. Then I turned to face my son one last time. "You asked me to leave," I said. "I'm leaving." Daniel stared at me. For just a fraction of a second, barely long enough to name it, something flickered in his eyes. Not regret. Not yet. But something. The ghost of something. I opened the front door. The October air hit my face, cool and clean, and carrying the smell of fallen leaves. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me, and I did not look back. The Lincoln was already waiting when I came down the front steps. I hadn't called ahead. I hadn't needed to. Thomas had been my driver for 11 years, long enough to know that when the leather suitcase came out, it meant something was ending. He was standing beside the car with the rear door open. His gray cap pulled low against the October wind. He looked at me, then at the suitcase in my hand, and he gave a single nod, the kind that carries an entire conversation without a syllable. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," he said, taking the bag from my hand. "Good morning, Thomas." He stowed the suitcase in the trunk with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this before, not with other clients, but with me. Because we had done this before. Not the leaving, but the precision, the readiness, the understanding that when I moved with intention. I settled into the back seat. The leather was warm. Thomas had preheated the cabin he always did when the temperature dropped below 50. He closed my door softly and walked around to the driver's side. "The Liberty?" he asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "The Liberty," I confirmed. "The Liberty Boston Hotel." A converted 19th century jailhouse on Beacon Street, iron railings, arched ceilings, stone walls that had once held men who had lost everything. I had always found a quiet irony in staying there. Today, the irony felt sharper than usual. Thomas pulled away from the curb, and I watched the Beacon Hill mansion shrink in the side mirror, the limestone facade, the black iron fence, the hydrangeas Margaret had planted along the front walk in 1999, now past their season, dry and skeletal in the morning light. The house grew smaller, and then it turned a corner and was gone. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and took out my phone. a single name in my contacts. Wallace. I pressed call. It rang twice. Arthur. Michael Wallace's voice was steady, alert. He had been expecting this call. He had been expecting it for 6 days, ever since I had walked into his Back Bay office and told him to have everything ready. Michael, I said, is it time? I looked out the window at the common, passing by joggers, dog walkers, a woman pushing a stroller. The ordinary world, moving at its ordinary pace, completely unaware that somewhere behind me, 2 people were about to discover that the floor they had been standing on was not theirs. Start, I said. A beat of quiet. Then understood. Phase 1 begins this morning. I ended the call and returned the phone to my pocket. Thomas glanced at me in the rearview mirror. He didn't ask. He never asked. But his eyes softened for just a moment, the look of a man who understood what it cost another man to make a phone call like that. You all right, Mr. Bennett? He asked. I considered the question honestly. My chest felt like the morning after a long rain, not empty, but cleared out, scoured clean by something that needed to happen. I'm all right, Thomas, I said. I'm better than I've been in a long time. He nodded and turned his eyes back to the road. What Thomas didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that the word start had just set 12 separate legal and financial instructions into motion. Michael Wallace was not merely my lawyer. He was the architect of a structure I had quietly built over the course of 30 years. A structure designed with one purpose, to make sure that everything I had built in my life could never be taken wasted or stolen, not even by the people who shared my name. Phase 1 was straightforward. By close of business today, every account that Daniel and Claire accessed through the Bennett Family Trust would be reviewed, flagged, and placed under my sole authority. Every credit card tied to a trust account would be suspended. The BMW Daniel drove leased under a Bennett LLC would be flagged for repossession. And the utility accounts for the Beacon Hill mansion, all 6 of them, would be transferred to a holding account that required my personal authorization to process payments. I had not done any of this out of anger. I had done it the way a surgeon does what must be done, precisely, without cruelty, but without hesitation. Back in the mansion, I could imagine it now, Claire was probably still filming. Still arranging herself in the living room light, composing a caption, building a narrative of domestic peace for an audience of 200,000 followers who believed she lived a charmed life. She would post something soft and curated. Maybe a cup of tea. Maybe morning light on the throw pillows. Her voice warm, her eyes bright. She had no idea that the audience was about to see something she had not planned. And Daniel. Daniel was probably standing in the foyer right now, looking at the closed front door, telling himself he had won something. That feeling would last until dinner. Thomas pulled up to the Liberty's entrance. A uniformed doorman stepped forward. Thomas came around to open my door before the doorman could reach it, a small gesture, but one that had always meant something to me. Loyalty expressed through small gestures. Margaret had taught me to notice those things. I stepped out. The morning air on Beacon Street smelled of coffee and car exhaust, and the particular crispness that Boston gets in the first week of October, when autumn stops being a suggestion and becomes a fact. I'll call you when I need you, I told Thomas. I'll be ready, he said. I walked through the Liberty's heavy iron doors, past the stone archways and the wrought iron railings that the designers had kept from the building's prison days. My room had been booked for 3 weeks. 3 weeks because that was how long I estimated the first phase would take to complete its work. At the front desk, the young man smiled warmly. Mr. Bennett, welcome back. Your room is ready. Thank you, son, I said. I took the key card and walked to the elevator. When the doors closed and I was alone, I let out a slow, measured breath, the first truly free breath I had taken in nearly 3 years. My eyes were dry, but somewhere behind my sternum, something ached with the particular pain of a man who has done what was right and still grieves the fact that it was necessary. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The machinery hummed, and somewhere across the city, Phase 1 had already begun. 2 days after I left, Michael Wallace called me at 9:30 in the evening. I was sitting in the armchair by the window in my room at the Liberty, a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table, the city lights of Beacon Street spread out below me like a slow, breathing thing. I had spent the day quietly reading, taking a short walk along the Charles River, eating a bowl of clam chowder at a counter diner where nobody knew my name. It had been in its strange way one of the most peaceful days I had experienced in 3 years. Then my phone buzzed. "Michael," I said. "Arthur." His voice carried that particular tone he used when delivering news he found professionally satisfying. Phase 1 just had its first public moment. I set down my tea. "Tell me." "Daniel took Claire to Harvest tonight. Cambridge. One of those places where the entrees cost $40 and the portions look like modern art." Wallace paused for effect the way he always did. "He tried to pay the check. First card declined. He tried a second. Declined. Tried a third. And declined." I could hear the restrained precision in Wallace's voice. The waiter had to come back to the table 3 times. By the third visit, the table next to them had gone very quiet. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not with satisfaction, with something more complicated. Something that tasted like vinegar and honey at the same time. "How much was the check?" I asked. $312. Daniel ended up calling the restaurant from his personal cell to give them a debit card number over the phone. The debit card went through. It was his personal account, not a trust account. But the damage was done. I could picture it exactly. Daniel in his linen shirt, jaw set, voice carefully controlled as he spoke quietly to the waiter. Claire across the table, her smile frozen in place, that professional smile she wore when something was going wrong and the room was watching. The sound of other diners pretending not to notice. "Did Claire say anything?" I asked. Wallace made a sound that was almost a laugh. "According to my contact at the restaurant, yes." When Daniel came back from the call, she leaned across the table and said, and I quote, "What is happening with our accounts, Daniel, because this is humiliating." My chest tightened, not with pleasure at their embarrassment, but with the particular grief of a father who recognizes his son's humiliation and knows he authored it. I had not done this to wound Daniel's pride. I had done it because Daniel needed to feel, for the first time in years, the weight of a world that did not automatically hold itself open for him. "And Daniel?" I asked. "What did he say to her?" "He told her the bank must have flagged the cards for unusual activity. Said he'd sort it out in the morning." Wallace's tone sharpened slightly. He was wrong about the morning, but he doesn't know that yet. I stood up from the armchair and walked to the window. Below me, Beacon Street moved on couples walking a cab, idling, the warm light spilling from restaurant windows. Life continuing at its indifferent pace. "Michael," I said, "the trust accounts, everything is clean, no exposure on our end. Everything is airtight." The suspension was executed under Section 7 of the Bennett Family Trust Instrument, which gives you as primary trustee sole authority to restrict access during any period of fiduciary review. I filed the review notice this afternoon. It's all documented. Daniel's attorney, if he hires one, will find nothing to challenge. "Good," I said. "There's one more thing." Wallace's voice shifted slightly, careful now, like a man choosing his words from a shorter list. "Claire posted tonight. Before the dinner, actually. She filmed herself in the kitchen at the house, arranging flowers, playing music, looking perfectly content. Caption said something about gratitude and home and the beauty of an ordinary evening." My jaw tightened. My hand gripped the phone a little harder. "She posted that," I said, "tonight. Posted it at 6:43 p.m., about an hour before the cards were declined." I breathed through my nose slowly. Claire had stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where she had dropped her shoes at my feet that morning, where my son had told me to kneel, and she had filmed a performance of domestic happiness for 200,000 strangers. She had packaged the place where I had been humiliated into content. "Arthur," Wallace's voice was measured, "are you all right?" Something tightened in my chest, not quite grief, not quite anger, but the particular heaviness of a man who has watched something he built be used as a stage prop. I was not going to cry, but I wanted to. Not for myself, for Margaret, for the home we had built together that had been turned into a backdrop for someone else's performance. "I'm all right, Michael," I said. "I'm all right." "Then let Phase 2 proceed on schedule." "Already moving," he said. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I ended the call and stood at the window for a long time, the tea forgotten, the city lights blurring slightly at the edges. Somewhere across that city, my son was sitting in a car with his wife trying to explain something he didn't yet understand, trying to assure her with words that would mean nothing by morning. I whispered to the glass, to no one, to Margaret, to the version of myself that had once believed love was enough to raise a grateful child. "I gave you everything, Daniel, everything I had, and you never once asked where it came from." I set the phone down on the side table beside the cooling tea. The room was quiet. That was enough for now. I learned what happened the next morning, not from the news, not from Daniel, but from Thomas. He called me at 7:45, his voice carrying that particular steadiness he used when delivering information he knew would land hard. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "the BMW is gone." I was standing at the small desk in my hotel room, a cup of black coffee in my hand, the morning light coming through the curtains in thin, pale lines. I had been awake since 5:30, old habit from the years when I opened the garage at 6, and the first customer arrived before the coffee had finished brewing. "The tow truck came at 7, Thomas continued. "I drove past the house on my way in like you asked. The space in front of the garage was empty. The tow company's slip was tucked under the windshield wiper of Claire's car, the Range Rover that's in her name, not the trust's. They didn't touch that one." "Good," I said. "That's exactly right." The BMW had been leased through Bennett Automotive LLC, one of the smaller holding companies under the family trust. When Wallace suspended the LLC's active accounts as part of Phase 1, the leasing company had been notified automatically that the guarantor account was under fiduciary review, under the terms of the lease that triggered an immediate right of repossession. It was all written in the contract Daniel had signed 3 years ago, a contract he had never read past the first page. "Was Daniel home when it happened?" I asked. Thomas cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. From what I could see, and I only drove past, I didn't stop, he came out the front door in his undershirt. He was waving his arms at the tow truck driver. The truck didn't stop." I set down my coffee cup. I pressed my fingertips against the desk surface. My son standing on the sidewalk in his undershirt, waving at a truck that would not stop, the image moved through me like cold water. Not triumphant, not satisfying, just deeply, quietly sad. "And Claire?" I asked. "She came out about 30 seconds later. She had her phone up filming." Thomas paused. "Then she stopped filming, put the phone in her robe pocket." "She deleted it," I said. "It wasn't a question." "I'd imagine so," Thomas said. "Wouldn't look good for the brand." "No, it would not." Claire's entire public identity rested on the image of a life that was curated and controlled. Beautiful home, successful husband, flawless mornings. A tow truck in the driveway at 7 a.m. Her husband, in his undershirt, screaming at a driver, was not content. It was evidence. I thanked Thomas, ended the call, and immediately dialed Wallace. He picked up on the first ring. "I've been waiting for your call," he said. "You heard about the BMW." Thomas told me. "What's next on the schedule?" "The utilities." Wallace's voice was brisk, efficient, the voice of a man who had been preparing for this for weeks. "The suspension orders went to the utility providers at 6 a.m. this morning. Boston Edison, the water authority, and the internet provider all have the trust as the account guarantor. By noon today, those accounts will be flagged for non-payment review, which triggers a service hold. They'll still have power and water until midnight. I wanted the cutoff to happen after business hours, so Daniel can't get anyone on the phone to fight it today." "And the garage lock?" I asked. Locksmith is scheduled for 2 p.m. The garage door opener code will be reset. The side door deadbolt will be replaced. Daniel's key will no longer work. Claire's Range Rover is parked on the street so she won't be trapped, but the garage itself will be inaccessible. I walked to the window and looked out at Beacon Street. A delivery truck was pulling up to the hotel entrance. A man in a bright orange vest was unloading boxes, working with the particular focused rhythm of someone who had a long day ahead of them. I watched him for a moment and felt something I hadn't expected, a quiet kinship. I had been that man. For most of my life, I had been exactly that man. "Michael," I said, "is this legal? All of it, every step, every single step?" His voice was firm and certain in the way that only 30 years of practice could produce. "You are the primary trustee of the Bennett Family Trust. The house on Beacon Hill is held by the trust. Daniel and Claire are occupants under a revocable occupancy arrangement, not a lease, not a deed. The trust agreement gives you the right to terminate that arrangement with 72 hours written notice, which I hand-delivered to the property yesterday morning." Daniel got the notice, left it with Claire at the front door. She signed for it. A beat. Whether she told Daniel about it is a separate question. My stomach dropped. Not because of the legal maneuver I had approved every detail, but because of the particular cruelty of imagining Claire receiving that document and saying nothing. Tucking it away. Deciding to deal with it later the way she decided to deal with everything that wasn't immediately useful to her image. "Arthur," Wallace's voice dropped half a note. "Are you holding up?" I turned away from the window. My legs felt heavy the way they sometimes did in the morning before the muscles remembered their job. My eyes were dry, but my throat ached with the particular rawness of a man who has not slept as well as he claimed. "I built that house, Michael," I said. "I laid the hardwood in the back study myself. Margaret picked the paint color for every room. I carried her over that threshold when we moved in." My voice held barely. "I know this is right, but right doesn't always feel the way you expect it to." Wallace let the words sit for a moment before answering. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "No," he said, "it rarely does. But you didn't start this, Arthur. You're just deciding how it ends." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Don't let anything slip past me," I said. "Not one step." "You'll know everything as it happens," he said. I ended the call. I picked up my coffee cup, found it had gone cold, and drank it anyway. Outside, the delivery man in the orange vest had finished his work and was climbing back into his truck. He looked up at the hotel just for a second, and then he was gone. By noon, the lights in the Beacon Hill mansion would begin to flicker. By midnight, they would go out entirely, and Daniel would finally begin to understand that the world he had been living in was not the world he thought it was. The morning after the lights went out, Daniel went to the bank. I knew because Wallace told me. And Wallace knew because the branch manager at the Back Bay location of First Commonwealth, a man named Richard Pruitt, who had handled the Bennett accounts for 9 years, called Wallace directly as per the standing instruction I had put in place 6 days before I left the house. Wallace called me at 2 in the afternoon. I was in the Liberty's reading room on the 2nd floor, a leather-bound chair, a window overlooking the courtyard, a copy of Marcus Aurelius open in my lap that I had not been able to concentrate on for the past hour. "Arthur," Wallace said, and I could hear the particular energy in his voice, the energy of a man who has watched a chess piece fall exactly where he predicted. "Daniel went to First Commonwealth this morning, 9:47 a.m. And," he sat down with Gerald, "asked to have all 3 suspended trust accounts reactivated immediately. Said there had been an error. Said he was the account manager and the suspension was unauthorized." Wallace paused. Gerald showed him the account documentation. My hand tightened around the phone. "How did Daniel react?" Gerald said he turned the screen toward Daniel and pointed to the primary account holder field. Wallace's voice was measured precise the way he always got when the facts were doing the work for him. "Your name, Arthur. Primary trustee and sole authorized signatory. Daniel's name appeared under the secondary access field authorized user spending privileges, no ownership rights. Gerald explained that under the trust instrument, the primary trustee has full authority to restrict or suspend secondary access at any time for any reason without prior notice to the secondary user. What did Daniel say? I asked. Wallace exhaled slowly. He said, and Gerald quoted this directly, "That is my father's account. My father is 72 years old and not mentally competent to be making these decisions alone." The words hit me like a hand flat against my chest. My jaw tightened. The words landed like a fist against my sternum. 72 years old and not mentally competent. My own son's voice in a bank chair saying that about me. 72 years old and not mentally competent. My son had sat in a bank chair and called my mind into question, had tried to dismantle my authority by dismantling me. What did Gerald say to that? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Gerald told Daniel that the bank would require a court-issued order of guardianship or conservatorship before making any changes to the account structure against the primary trustee's instructions. He also told Daniel that without such an order, any further attempts to access or alter the accounts would be flagged as potential financial interference. Wallace let that settle for a moment. Daniel left the bank. Gerald said his face was his exact word, was unrecognizable, like he didn't know which expression to wear. I stood up from the armchair. I walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below a stone fountain, a pair of pigeons, a young couple eating lunch on a bench. Ordinary life. Life that required no performance, no manipulation, no borrowed power. And Claire, I asked, what happened with her contracts? That came through this morning as well. Wallace's tone shifted businesslike, but with an edge of something colder underneath. 3 of her 4 active sponsorship contracts contain a morality clause and a brand safety clause. When her account management platform went dark, because it was running through a Bennett LLC subscription, her posting consistency dropped. 2 sponsors flagged it automatically. The 3rd sponsor's team reviewed her recent content and found the clip from the morning she came home to the house after the shoe incident. My breath caught. Someone posted that, a neighbor's security camera, partial angle. You can see Claire on the front steps, Daniel behind her. The audio is poor, but you can hear raised voices and make out enough. Wallace cleared his throat. It circulated in a local community group first, then someone reposted it with a caption. By this morning it had been viewed 14,000 times. The 3rd sponsor sent a termination notice at 11 a.m. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass of the window. 14,000 people. 14,000 strangers had watched a fragment of the morning. My son told me to kneel, and somewhere in that fragment, the truth had leaked out in ways Claire's carefully arranged content never could have predicted. She built her entire income on the image of a perfect life. I said more to myself than to Wallace. And the one morning she forgot to control the frame controlled her, Wallace said quietly. My eyes stung. Not for Claire, for the waste of it. For the extraordinary waste of a life spent performing instead of living. Margaret had never performed a single day. She had simply been warm and difficult and real and ours. And now the house she loved was dark, and the woman who had taken her place in it was watching her constructed world come apart at the seams, one sponsored post at a time. Arthur, Wallace said, Daniel is going to start looking for you. He's going to start asking questions he should have asked years ago. I know, I said. Are you ready for that? I thought about it honestly, the way Margaret had always insisted I think about hard things fully and without flinching. I've been ready for 30 years, I said. I just hoped I'd never have to use it. Wallace was quiet for a breath. Then I'll keep you informed. Every step, I said. I ended the call. Daniel was going to go looking. I had known that from the moment I walked out the front door. The only question that had ever mattered was what he would find when he finally looked in the right direction. Thomas called me on Saturday morning with the kind of update that arrives quietly, but lands with the force of something much louder. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "your son is in South End." I was at the small table in my hotel room, halfway through a plate of scrambled eggs I had ordered from room service. I set my fork down. "Where exactly?" I asked. "Bennett Heritage Complex. He's been standing outside for about 20 minutes. He went inside once, came back out. Now he's on the sidewalk making phone calls." Thomas paused. "I'm parked half a block down. He hasn't noticed me." "Good. Stay where you are. Tell me what you see." Thomas was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man watching carefully. Then, "He's off the phone now. Going back inside. There's a man at the front desk, older fellow, glasses, brown vest. They're talking." I knew exactly who that was. Raymond Okafor, building manager for the Bennett Heritage Complex for the past 14 years. A careful, unflappable man who had navigated every variety of difficult tenant and difficult conversation the South End could produce. I had called Raymond 2 days ago. He knew what to say if Daniel showed up. "Keep watching," I told Thomas. "Call me when Daniel leaves." I finished my eggs without tasting them. Then I sat back and waited. Raymond called me 11 minutes later. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice carrying the gentle formality he always used with me. "Your son just left. I thought you'd want to know how it went." "Tell me everything, Raymond." Raymond cleared his throat. He came in through the main entrance asking who owned the building. I told him the property was held by Bennett Heritage LLC. He asked who ran the LLC. I told him the managing member was listed in the public registry and he was welcome to look it up. A brief pause. He said he didn't need to look it up, that his family had some connection to the property, and he wanted to speak with whoever was in charge of decisions. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "What did you say?" I told him the managing member didn't take walk-in meetings, but I could pass along a message. He asked me directly if I knew an Arthur Bennett. Raymond's voice was careful now, precise. I told him yes, I knew an Arthur Bennett. That Mr. Bennett was listed as a maintenance consultant on several of the building's older renovation contracts. A small, involuntary sound escaped me, something between a laugh and a sigh. Maintenance consultant. Raymond had delivered the line with a completely straight face, I was certain of it. "How did Daniel respond to that?" I asked. "He relaxed, actually." Raymond's tone carried the faintest note of disbelief. His shoulders came down. He said, I'm quoting now, that makes sense. He used to be a mechanic. Of course they'd use him for something like that." Then he asked if the building was worth much. I told him the complex was assessed at a substantial value and left it at that. Raymond paused. He seemed satisfied, almost relieved if I had to choose a word. My chest ached with a dull, persistent throb. Relieved. My son had walked into a building I owned outright, 8 stories, 42 units, a commercial ground floor, with 3 long-term tenants, and when told I was the maintenance consultant, he had felt relieved. Because that version of me fit the story he needed to believe. The old man. The mechanic. The man who polished shoes and cracked eggs and existed on the margins of a life that belonged to someone younger, someone smarter, someone more deserving. "Raymond," I said, and my voice came out rough at the edges. "Thank you. You handled it exactly right." "Of course, Mr. Bennett." His voice softened slightly. "Sir, is there anything else you need from us? The staff here, we want you to know whatever you're going through, we're all behind you." My throat tightened. My eyes went hot and full in a way I hadn't expected. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed carefully through it. "That means more than you know, Raymond," I managed. "More than you know." I ended the call and sat for a long moment at the small hotel table, the empty breakfast plate in front of me, the morning light coming through the curtains in pale bands across the carpet. Somewhere in South End, Daniel was walking back to wherever Claire was waiting, carrying a story about his father that made the world feel orderly again. A mechanic, a maintenance man, a small, manageable figure. Thomas called 10 minutes later. "He's gone, Mr. Bennett. Got in a rideshare. Headed north, probably back to Beacon Hill." "Thank you, Thomas." "You all right, sir?" I thought of Daniel's shoulders dropping with relief at the word maintenance consultant. I thought of Margaret, who had stood in that building's lobby the day we closed on it, and said quietly and without ceremony, "Arthur, we did something real here." I thought of how Daniel had never once asked how we had done it, had never been curious enough to wonder. "I'm all right," I told Thomas. My voice held, but only just. "He'll go digging soon. When he does, he won't find what he expects." "No, sir," Thomas said. "I don't imagine he will." I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Saturday morning city. People moving with purpose, the ordinary, beautiful machinery of lives built on honest work. Somewhere under those streets were the foundations of things I had spent a lifetime constructing. And my son had just walked across them without knowing he was standing on his father's ground. By the second week of October, Daniel had hired a private investigator. I found out the way I found out most things those days, not from Daniel himself, but from the network of quiet, loyal people who had been watching over my affairs long before my son realized there was anything worth watching. Thomas spotted the investigator first. A man in a gray sedan, parked outside the Liberty Hotel on Sunday morning, engine running a camera with a long lens resting on the passenger seat. Thomas had driven past, twice memorized the plate, and called Wallace before he called me. Wallace called me at 10 on Monday morning. "Arthur," he said, his voice carrying that composed, unhurried quality that I had come to recognize as his version of excitement. "Daniel retained a private investigator late Friday. Man named Gerald Croft, licensed mid-level, mostly does infidelity cases and insurance fraud. Not someone who usually handles this kind of work." "What kind of work does Daniel think this is?" I asked. He filed the PI request under a family welfare inquiry. His stated concern in writing, which Croft was legally required to document, was that his elderly father was being manipulated by outside parties and needed to be located for his own safety. Wallace paused. "Arthur, he framed hiring a detective to follow you as an act of love." My hand gripped the phone hard enough that my knuckles ached. Love. The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. Not with a splash, but with that slow, sinking displacement that changes the shape of everything beneath the surface. My son had told the world he was worried about me while the lights in my house were out, because he had spent 3 years treating me like a house servant. "What has Croft reported back?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "That," Wallace said, and now I could hear the undisguised satisfaction in his tone, "is where things get interesting." He shuffled papers on his end of the line. "Croft's preliminary report filed yesterday states the following subject. That's you departs the Liberty Hotel each morning between 7:30 and 9 a.m. Subject is transported by private car to various locations, including the offices of Wallace and Associates, the First Commonwealth Private Banking Center on Boylston, the Bennett Heritage Complex in South End, and on Thursday, the 42nd floor of 1 Federal Street, where subject met with the executive team of Meridian Capital Group for approximately 2 hours. My jaw loosened slightly. I had forgotten I would be seen at Meridian. I had been so focused on the mechanics of Phase 1 that I hadn't considered what the meetings would look like from the outside. Croft also noted, Wallace continued, that subject was greeted by name at every location. That subject was escorted, not made to wait. That at 1 Federal Street, the building receptionist called the 42nd floor and said again, I'm quoting the report directly, Mr. Bennett is here, and that 3 people came down in the elevator to receive him. I exhaled slowly. 3 people had come down to receive me, because that was how James Harrington at Meridian operated. He was old-fashioned that way, believed that the way you welcomed a man told him everything about how you valued his time. How did Daniel react to the report? I asked. Wallace's voice shifted, careful now, choosing words with a surgeon's precision. Croft included a note at the bottom of the report. He wrote, and I have the document in front of me, subject does not present as a man requiring welfare intervention. Subject presents as a man conducting active business at a senior executive level. Recommend client clarify objectives before further surveillance. The air went out of the room. Or maybe just out of me. A private investigator, a man paid by my son to find evidence that I was diminished, confused, in need of rescue, had instead filed a report saying I looked like a man running a business. And Daniel had received that report and had to sit with it. Had to read those words in his own hired investigator's handwriting and feel whatever it felt like to discover that the story you've been telling yourself about someone has no evidence to support it. Did Daniel ask Croft to continue? I asked. He paid for another week, Wallace said. But Croft sent a message through his assistant saying he'd only continue if the client adjusted the stated purpose of the inquiry. He wasn't comfortable with the welfare framing anymore. I stood up from the armchair where I'd been sitting and walked to the window. The October sky outside was a hard, clear blue, the kind of blue that only appears after several days of cold, as though the sky has been scrubbed clean. I pressed my palm against the glass and felt the chill come through. Michael, I said, when Daniel reads that report, when he really reads it, what do you think he feels? Wallace was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was being honest rather than professional. I think he feels the ground move, he said. I think he starts to wonder if the floor he's been standing on is as solid as he believed. My throat closed for a moment. I pressed my thumb against the window frame and held it there, letting the cold of the glass do the work my composure could not quite manage alone. I thought of Daniel at 8 years old, running across the lawn at the Beacon Hill house on a summer afternoon, laughing at something I couldn't remember, what laughing so freely that his whole body was involved in it. A child who had never wondered where the lawn came from, who had never needed to. Stay close to this, I said. I want to know everything. I won't leave you in the dark, Wallace said. I ended the call. Across the city, my son was reading a report that didn't say what he needed it to say. I had read enough reports in my life to know what that felt like. I hoped still, even now, that the discomfort would do what I had not been able to do in 3 years of quiet, make him stop and think. 2 days after Daniel received Croft's report, he walked into Suffolk County Probate and Family Court. Wallace found out within the hour. He had a contact in the clerk's office, not for anything improper, simply someone who had worked alongside the Bennett Trust matters long enough to know which filings warranted a phone call. The call came at 11:15 on Wednesday morning. I was finishing a late breakfast in the Liberty's dining room, oatmeal, with brown sugar, the same breakfast I had made for myself every morning of my adult life. The same breakfast I had made in the Beacon Hill kitchen, while Daniel and Claire slept past 9 when my phone rang. Arthur? Wallace's voice was taut. Not panicked, Wallace never panicked, but taut the way a bowstring is taut just before release. Daniel filed a petition this morning. Guardianship and conservatorship. He's claiming you lack the mental capacity to manage your own financial affairs. The oatmeal went cold in front of me. My spoon rested against the rim of the bowl. I felt something move through my chest, not fear, not quite, but the particular sensation of watching someone reach for a weapon they don't realize is pointed the wrong direction. Tell me exactly what he filed, I said. The petition cites 3 grounds. Wallace's voice was crisp, professional, the voice he used when he needed me to hear clearly and not emotionally. First, alleged erratic financial behavior, specifically the account suspensions, the utility cutoffs, and the BMW repossession. He's framing your deliberate decisions as evidence of cognitive decline. Second, a claim that you abandoned your residence without explanation, which he's calling a sign of disorientation. A pause. Third, he submitted a letter, purportedly from a physician named Dr. Howard Crane. The letter states that in the physician's professional opinion, Arthur Bennett shows early signs of cognitive impairment and may not be capable of independent decision-making. My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Dr. Howard Crane. I had never met a Dr. Howard Crane. I had never sat in his office, never given him a health history, never allowed him to evaluate anything about me. And yet here was a letter with his name on it being submitted to a court of law to strip me of the right to make decisions about my own life. That letter is fabricated, I said. Almost certainly, Wallace said. And that is precisely the problem Daniel is about to discover. I set down my phone for just a moment and pressed both hands flat on the linen tablecloth. I breathed in. I breathed out. Then I picked the phone back up. Tell him, Michael. 7 months ago, Wallace said, and his voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man delivering the answer to a question that has been patiently waiting. On the 15th of March, you sat for a full neuropsychological evaluation at Massachusetts General Hospital. 4 hours. Dr. Patricia Sterling, board-certified neurologist, faculty at Harvard Medical School, one of the most credentialed cognitive assessment specialists in New England. He paused to let that settle. Dr. Sterling's report is 41 pages. It documents executive function, memory processing, speed judgment, and reasoning. The conclusion, in her own words. Arthur James Bennett presents with cognitive function in the superior range for his age cohort. No indicators of impairment. No indicators of early decline. Full decision-making capacity confirmed. My eyes burned. Not because I was surprised by the result, I had known what Dr. Sterling would find, because I knew my own mind. My eyes burned because of the date. March 15th. 7 months before Daniel walked into that courthouse. 7 months before he fabricated a doctor's letter and tried to hand a judge a reason to take my life away from me. I had sat in that evaluation room and answered every question and completed every assessment, not because I doubted myself, but because I had known with a cold, clear certainty that this day would come. I had built the shield before my son even thought to pick up the sword. Wallace, I said, and my voice cracked at the edge just slightly, just enough to be honest. File the Sterling report with the court today. Full document, every page. Already prepared, he said. I'll have it submitted within the hour. I'll also file a formal complaint regarding the Crane letter. Will request verification of Dr. Crane's license and the legitimacy of any examination he claims to have conducted. And the petition itself, it will be dismissed. His voice was certain. A judge will not appoint a guardian over a man with a 41-page neurological clearance from a Harvard-affiliated physician. Daniel's attorney, whoever he found on short notice, should have done due diligence before filing. This is going to come back at him hard. I pushed the oatmeal aside. My appetite was completely gone, replaced by something heavier and more complicated. A grief that sat right beside the vindication and refused to be separated from it. My son had tried to have me declared incompetent. He had tried to take from me the most fundamental thing a person possesses, the legal recognition of their own mind. Patricia Sterling, I said quietly. When I left her office in March, do you know what she said to me? No, Wallace said. She said, Mr. Bennett, whoever is waiting for you to slow down is going to have a very long wait. My voice broke on the last word cleanly, and without warning, the way old timber sometimes breaks, not with a crack, but with a deep, exhausted split. She was talking about my health, but she might as well have been talking about everything. Wallace said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I'll file within the hour," he said. "And Arthur, he's not going to win this. Not today, not any day." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I sat alone in the Liberty's dining room with cold oatmeal in front of me, and a chest full of something that felt like grief and dignity fused together into a single aching thing. Outside the tall windows, Boston moved on buses, pedestrians, the whole indifferent machinery of a city that didn't know and didn't need to know what was happening in a courtroom 3 blocks away. My son had reached for the one weapon he thought I couldn't counter. He had forgotten that his father had spent a lifetime thinking 3 moves ahead. We are exactly halfway through this story, and what Daniel is about to do next will change everything. Before I take you there, drop the number 72 in the comments right now. That's Arthur's age, so I know you're still writing this with me. Because what happens in the next few minutes, nobody saw it coming. Please note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for dramatic and educational purposes. Some details may not reflect reality. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a good moment to step away. No hard feelings. The petition was dismissed on a Thursday afternoon. Wallace called me with the news at 4:17, his voice carrying the clean, quiet satisfaction of a man who had watched justice arrive exactly on schedule. The judge had reviewed Dr. Sterling's 41-page evaluation, noted the absence of any verified clinical contact between Arthur Bennett and the purported Dr. Howard Crane, and dismissed the petition with prejudice. The court had also referred the Crane letter to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine for review of possible credential fraud. Daniel had walked out of that courthouse with nothing. Less than nothing, he had walked out with a referral hanging over the attorney who had filed on his behalf. I had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has won a battle he never wanted to fight. That night, Daniel broke into my office. I did not know it was happening as it happened. I found out the next morning when Wallace called me at 7:30 and said 4 words I had been half expecting for days. He found the room. I set down my coffee. When? Last night. Approximately 10 p.m. The building's security system logged a door breach on the 3rd floor, Suite 3C. The exterior lock was forced a bump key from the marks on the cylinder. He was inside for 43 minutes. Wallace's voice was measured, but underneath the professionalism, I could hear something else, something almost like awe. Arthur. He went through everything. Suite 3C. That room had existed for 11 years. I had never advertised it, never listed it on any building directory, never mentioned it in conversation with anyone except Wallace and Thomas. It was registered to a shell entity, Bennett Research and Holdings LLC, a name deliberately chosen to be forgettable. The door was plain. The frosted glass panel beside it bore no name. To anyone walking that corridor, it looked like a storage room or a rarely used conference space. What it actually contained was the quiet architecture of my working life. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along 3 walls, tax law, estate planning, property management. 4 decades of industry journals I had annotated in pencil. A mahogany desk with a single lamp. A brass anniversary clock that Margaret had given me in 1991, its pendulum still keeping perfect time. And on the desk, exactly where I had left it, a leather-bound journal, dark brown, initialed with my monogram in gold on the cover. I had left that journal there deliberately. "Tell me what the cameras show," I said. Wallace walked me through it. Daniel entering the building through the south end service entrance, the one the loading dock used, which had a slower camera cycle. Moving up the stairwell to the 3rd floor. Standing in the corridor for nearly 4 minutes, trying the doors until he found Suite 3C. The forced entry. Then the camera inside the suite, a small lens mounted in the smoke detector installed 3 years ago at my instruction, capturing everything. "He went to the bookshelves first," Wallace said. "Pulled books out, put them back. Then the desk drawers all empty as you left them. He picked up the clock, turned it over, set it down. A pause. Then he found the journal. My jaw tightened. He sat down at the desk, Wallace continued, opened it to the first page, spent approximately 6 minutes on the opening sections that would be the financial notes and the correspondence summaries. Another pause, longer this time. Then he reached the map. The map. I had drawn it myself 3 years ago on a sheet of cream-colored drafting paper that I had folded and tucked into the journal's back pocket. A hand-drawn diagram of the South End Block Bennett Heritage Complex, at center the surrounding streets, the adjacent parcels I had optioned, but not yet developed. In the margins in my own handwriting, legal notations, Lot 7, primary development candidate, estimated current value, 40 to 45 million zoning variants approved, March 2024, Bennett Heritage, LLC sole title holder. I had drawn that map because I think in pictures. Because sometimes I needed to look at what I had built spread out in front of me, rendered in my own hand in order to understand its full shape. I had not drawn it as a trap, but I had known with the cold, patient certainty of a man who understands how greed moves through a desperate person, that if Daniel ever found that room, the map would be the thing he couldn't leave behind. "Wallace," I said. "What did he do when he saw the map?" "He photographed it," Wallace said, "with his phone. Multiple angles. Then he photographed several pages of the legal notes. He spent 11 more minutes at the desk reading." A brief pause. "When he left, he took nothing physical, but he had everything he needed on that phone." My chest rose and fell slowly. I thought of Daniel sitting at my desk, the desk where I had signed the papers for Bennett Heritage, where I had read the zoning variance approval, with Margaret's photograph, watching from the shelf, where I had spent countless late nights, working through the arithmetic of a life built on discipline and patience. I thought of him sitting in my chair under my lamp, photographing the evidence of my work, with the intention of using it for his own benefit. The grief of it was physical, a weight behind my sternum that pressed outward with every breath. "He doesn't know about the camera," I said. "He has no idea," Wallace confirmed. "We have 43 minutes of clear footage. His face, his actions, the phone screen reflecting in the desk lamp, all of it documented." "Good," I said. My voice came out rough and low. "Don't touch it yet. Don't file anything. Let him move." "You want to see how far he'll go," Wallace said. "I need to know," I said. "I need to know exactly who my son has become." The line was quiet for a moment. Outside my hotel window, Boston was waking up, the early October light falling sharp and cold across the rooftops, the city beginning its Friday, with the ordinary confidence of a place that has survived harder things than this. Inside my chest, something ached with a depth that had no clean name. Not anger, not quite grief. Something between the two, the feeling of a man who has set a stage and now must watch the play unfold, knowing every scene, dreading every line. Daniel met Frank Della on a Monday afternoon. I knew about the meeting before it happened. Wallace had flagged Della's name the previous Friday. The same afternoon, Daniel left Suite 3C with a phone full of photographs. Della operated out of a shared office in the Seaport District. His business card read, Commercial Property Acquisitions Consultant, and his record with the Massachusetts Board of Real Estate included 2 formal complaints. In the past 6 years, both settled quietly, both involving transactions where documentation had been as one complaint, described it, creatively interpreted. In plain language, Frank Della was the kind of broker you called when you needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Thomas parked across from the coffee shop on Seaport Boulevard at 1:45. The meeting had been arranged for 2 o'clock. Daniel arrived at 1:58 carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of a man who believed he was about to execute something brilliant. Thomas called me the moment Daniel walked in. I was sitting in Wallace's office in Back Bay, both of us listening through the phone on speaker, the afternoon light coming through the tall windows and laying itself across Wallace's desk, like something indifferent and beautiful. "He's inside," Thomas said. "Della's already at a corner table. They're shaking hands." "Stay close," I said. "Call me when Daniel leaves." Wallace and I waited. The office was quiet, except for the occasional sound of traffic from Boylston Street below and the soft tick of the clock on Wallace's bookshelf. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. At 2:47, Thomas called back. His voice was different, tighter, carrying something I recognized as barely restrained astonishment. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "you need to hear this. Tell me." Thomas had moved to a table inside the coffee shop close enough to hear far enough to be unremarkable, a habit he had developed over 11 years of navigating situations where presence had to be invisible. He had recorded the conversation on his phone. Wallace's assistant had already retrieved the audio file by the time Thomas delivered his summary. "Daniel presented Della with 2 documents," Thomas said. "First, the photographs of your map and journal notes. He had printed them out, full color, annotated them with his own handwriting. He had circled Lot 7 and written the estimated value in red marker." A pause. $42 million. That's what he wrote. My stomach turned over. The number was accurate, close enough to the true assessed value that it confirmed Daniel had done at least some research after photographing the journal. He hadn't simply stolen the map. He had studied it. "The second document," Thomas continued, "was a copy of the guardianship petition, the one the court dismissed. He presented it to Della as evidence of his authority to act on your behalf." The air left my lungs. I looked at Wallace across the desk. Wallace's jaw was set, his eyes very still, the expression of a man who has heard something that has crossed from the civil into the criminal and knows it. "He used a dismissed petition," I said. My voice came out flat and quiet, the way a voice gets when emotion has been compressed so tightly it can't expand. "A document a judge rejected. He presented it to a broker as proof he has authority over my assets." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. And Della looked at it for about 30 seconds and said, "I have the recording." He said, "This is a court document. That works for me." I pressed my hand flat against the arm of the chair. My fingers were trembling slightly, not from age, not from weakness, but from the particular physical response of a body confronting something the mind is still trying to process. My son, my 42-year-old son, had walked into a room and presented a fraudulent claim of authority over my property to a broker willing to facilitate a $42 million transaction on that basis. "What happened next?" Wallace asked. He was speaking to Thomas now, leaning forward slightly, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Della told Daniel the property was not a vacant lot," Thomas said. He pulled it up on his laptop, county assessor's records, pulled the parcel number from Daniel's map. He turned the screen around and told Daniel the address. A beat of silence on the line. Daniel's face went white. I closed my eyes for just a moment. He didn't know. He had no idea, Thomas confirmed. He thought Lot 7 was an undeveloped parcel, a piece of land, something he could sell out from under you before you could stop him. Thomas's voice was careful, measured. Della told him the parcel is the Bennett Heritage Complex. 8 stories, 42 units, 3 commercial tenants on the ground floor. Assessed at $41.3 million. And Thomas paused. Sole title holder listed in the county registry as Bennett Heritage LLC managing member Arthur James Bennett. The room went very still. I opened my eyes. Wallace was watching me with the expression he reserved for moments when professional composure and personal concern existed in exactly equal measure. "Daniel's reaction," I said. "He stood up," Thomas said. His chair scraped back loud enough that 2 other tables looked over. He grabbed his folder off the table. His hands were shaking, Mr. Bennett. I could see it from where I was sitting. He said to Della, "You're wrong. Run it again." Della ran it again. Same result. Thomas exhaled slowly. Daniel left without another word. Didn't shake Della's hand. Didn't pick up his coffee. Just walked out. I sat back in the chair. My chest was full of something vast and complicated. The grief of a father who has watched his son reach for something he was never meant to have, and the cold, clear recognition that what Daniel had done in that coffee shop was no longer a family matter. "Michael," I said, "wire fraud, forgery, use of fraudulent court documentation in a financial transaction. Federal offenses," Wallace said. His voice was quiet but precise like a scalpel. "All three. Wallace and Associates will have a full legal memorandum prepared by morning. We'll also formally request that Della preserve the documentation Daniel presented and the recording of the conversation as material evidence." "And Daniel?" I asked. Wallace looked at me steadily across the desk. "He just handed us everything we need," he said. "The question now is what you want to do with it." I thought of Daniel's shaking hands. I thought of a manila folder with a red marker circle around $42 million. I thought of a boy who had never once asked how the money got there, only how to take it. "Give me until morning," I said. "I need to think." Outside Wallace's window, the October afternoon was beginning to cool toward evening, the light shifting from gold to the particular amber that precedes darkness. Somewhere across the city, my son was driving or walking or sitting somewhere, trying to reconstruct a world that had just changed shape around him again. He thought the worst was behind him. He had no idea what was still coming. I arrived at Wallace's office at 8:30 the next morning with a container of coffee from the diner across the street, and the particular steadiness of a man who has spent the night not sleeping but thinking. Wallace was already at his desk when I walked in. His reading glasses were on his jacket, hung neatly on the coat stand behind him, 3 manila folders spread across the desk, in a row like cards laid face down before a hand is revealed. He looked up when I entered, studied my face for a moment, the way he always did, and said nothing about what he found there. "Sit down, Arthur," he said instead. "There's a great deal to go through." I sat. I set the coffee between us. Outside the tall windows, Back Bay was moving through its Tuesday morning at its unhurried pace, a woman walking a dog the size of a small horse, a postal truck, double-parked 2 men in hard hats, consulting a blueprint stretched across the hood of a pickup. The ordinary, decent world of people doing their work. "The footage from Suite 3C, I said. "You have it secured. Formally preserved as of yesterday evening." Wallace opened the first folder. "I filed a preservation order with our digital forensics firm. Every frame of the 43 minutes Daniel spent in that room has been authenticated, time-stamped, and stored on an encrypted server with chain-of-custody documentation. If this goes to trial, federal or state, every second of that recording is admissible." "And the Della meeting." Wallace opened the second folder. "Thomas's recording has been transferred, authenticated, and preserved under the same protocol." He turned the folder toward me. Inside was a printed transcript, 4 pages single-spaced, the conversation between Daniel and Frank Della rendered in plain text, with timestamps in the left margin. "I've also contacted Della directly. He was cooperative, I suspect, because he realized the moment Daniel walked out that he had nearly become an accessory to federal fraud and was not at all comfortable with that proximity." "Della will testify?" I asked. "He'll provide a sworn statement. Whether it goes further depends on what the federal prosecutor's office decides to do with the referral." Wallace clasped his hands on the desk. "Arthur, I want to be very clear about what Daniel has exposed himself to. Using a dismissed court order as documentation of legal authority in a real estate transaction is forgery. Attempting to negotiate the sale of a property he has no legal claim to constitutes wire fraud under federal statute, because the communication with Della crossed multiple jurisdictions electronically. The breaking and entering at Suite 3C is a separate state criminal charge, Class B felony in Massachusetts." I picked up the transcript and read the first page slowly. Daniel's words in plain black type. the confidence in them, the casual, practiced certainty of a man who believed he had finally found his leverage. I read the line where he told Della the property was worth $42 million. His voice, according to the transcript, was steady, almost smooth, and something in my chest contracted so sharply I had to set the papers down. "Michael," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. When I put that journal in Suite 3C when I left the map where it could be found, I told myself I was testing his conscience, giving him a chance to see the map, recognize my name on the title, and walk away. My jaw tightened. I told myself there was still a version of Daniel that would look at that property and think, "This is my father's. I won't touch it." Wallace watched me carefully. He didn't offer reassurance. He knew better than that. "He didn't walk away," I said. "No," Wallace said. "He didn't." I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose. My jaw ached from holding it set. I had stopped expecting the pain to go away. I had simply learned to carry it and keep walking. I was not going to cry in Wallace's office. I had made that private compact with myself on the walk over this morning. But the burning wouldn't stop, and I had stopped expecting it to. "The test," I said. I wanted him to fail it so I could act. And I wanted him to pass it so I wouldn't have to. I looked up at the ceiling for a moment, at the ornate plasterwork that the building's previous owners had restored at considerable expense. A man shouldn't have to want two contradictory things that badly about his own son. Wallace let the words settle. Then carefully, "Arthur, what he did in Suite 3C and what he did with Della. These are not the actions of a man who made one bad decision in a moment of pressure. These are the actions of a man who has been building towards something like this for a long time. The resources, the planning, the willingness to use a fraudulent court document." He stopped himself. "You didn't create this in him. You need to understand that." My throat tightened. "I raised him, Michael." "You did," Wallace said. "And then he made his choices." A pause. "Now you make yours." I looked at the two folders on the desk. 43 minutes of footage. 4 pages of transcript. A forensic chain of custody that would hold up in any court in the country. "File the referral," I said. "Federal prosecutor's office. Everything, the Suite 3C footage, the Della recording, the falsified guardianship petition, the Crane letter. All of it." My voice was steady now, steadier than my hands, which I kept flat on my thighs so Wallace wouldn't see. "If Daniel is going to burn this down, I am not going to pretend I don't see the smoke." Wallace nodded once. He picked up his pen. "And the state breaking and entering charge. File that too," I said. "Everything, Michael, all of it." He wrote something in the margin of the folder. Then he looked up at me with the expression of a man who has worked alongside someone long enough to recognize the precise cost of what they've just said. "I'll have it submitted by end of day," he said. I nodded. I picked up my coffee cup, found it had gone lukewarm, and drank it anyway. Outside, the hard hats had rolled up their blueprint. The postal truck was gone. The woman with the enormous dog had turned a corner and disappeared. The morning was moving forward the way mornings do, without sentiment, without pause, without any particular regard for the people caught inside it. "There's something else," Wallace said, and something in his tone made me set the cup down. "Tell me," I said. He opened the third folder. The third folder was thicker than the other two. Wallace slid it across the desk toward me without a word, which was how I knew whatever was inside had weight enough to speak for itself. I opened it. The first page was a spreadsheet. Columns of numbers running down the page in clean, unforgiving rows. Dates on the left, descriptions in the middle, amounts on the right. At the top of the page, a header in Wallace's firm's letterhead. Bennett Family Trust Disbursement Ledger, January 2020 through October 2025. Prepared by Wallace and Associates in conjunction with Meridian Forensic Accounting Group. 5 years. "Walk me through it," I said. Wallace leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and began. His voice was even and precise, the voice he used when the numbers were doing the emotional work, and he knew it. The Beacon Hill mortgage, he said, pointing to the first cluster of entries. $3,400 per month. Paid from the Bennett Family Trust since January 2020, the month Daniel and Claire moved into the house. In 5 years, the trust has paid $204,000 in mortgage payments on a property Daniel has referred to in multiple conversations, and one court document as my house. My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet. Utilities, Wallace continued. Electric, gas, water, internet averaged $840 per month over 5 years. Total $50,400. Paid by the trust. He moved his finger down the page. The BMW lease $780 per month for 38 months before repossession. $29,640. Trust account. He turned to the second page. Groceries, household supplies, and maintenance the trust held an account at a premium grocery delivery service and 2 household management companies. Total expenditure over 5 years, $61,200. I set the spreadsheet down on the desk. My hands were trembling finely, the way they sometimes did when my body registered something before my mind had finished processing it. I picked the paper back up immediately. I was not going to let go of it. I needed the paper in my hands because the numbers on it were real, and the reality of them was the only thing keeping me anchored to the present moment. Claire's business expenses, Wallace said, moving to page 3. The Bennett LLC subscription that powered her content management platform, $420 per month for 4 years. The photography equipment she listed as a business asset trust, paid $11,000 in 2021. The conference attendance, the brand development consultant she hired in 2022, all of it routed through a Bennett subsidiary account that Daniel set up in Claire's name without, I should note, your knowledge or written authorization. I looked up from the spreadsheet. He routed her business expenses through my trust without my authorization. Without documentation of authorization, Wallace said carefully. He had access as a secondary user, as we've established. He used that access in ways that went considerably beyond personal living expenses. I set the papers flat on the desk and pressed both palms down on top of them. My throat felt raw. My chest felt like something inside it was slowly, inexorably tightening, a vice closing by increments, each new number, another quarter turn of the handle. What is the total? I said. Wallace turned to this final page. At the bottom, a single line, bold typeface. Total trust disbursements attributable to Daniel and Claire Bennett's household and business expenses, January 2020 to October 2025. He turned the page to face me. The number was $612,480. $612,000. Over 5 years. From a trust they had never contributed to, never acknowledged, never once in any conversation I could recall expressed gratitude for. My eyes filled. Not overflowed, filled the way a glass fills right to the surface, tension trembling there, not yet spilling. I breathed carefully through my nose. My vision blurred at the edges and then steadied. Daniel told a judge I was not mentally competent, I said. My voice came out barely above a murmur. He called me cognitively impaired. He stood in a courthouse and questioned my mind, while living in a house my trust was paying. For driving a car, my trust was leasing. Eating food, my trust was buying. I stopped, swallowed. He called me a maintenance man. Arthur, $600,000, I said. And not once. Not one single time in 5 years did either of them sit down with me and say thank you. Not for the money, not even for the eggs I made every morning. Just thank you for being here. Thank you for existing. Something. My voice broke on that last word. Cleanly, completely, without warning, the way it had broken when I mentioned Dr. Sterling, but deeper this time, more total. I brought one hand up and pressed it against my mouth for a moment. My shoulders pulled forward involuntarily, the body's ancient posture of pain absorbing itself inward. Wallace did not look away. He did not offer hollow comfort. He simply waited with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some grief has to be witnessed rather than managed. After a moment, I lowered my hand. I straightened my back. I picked up the ledger and read the final page one more time, slowly and completely, until every number had settled into me like sediment into still water. "This goes into the evidence package," I said. My voice was steady again, not because the pain had passed, but because I had decided where to put it. All 5 years, every line item. "It's already prepared," Wallace said. "The forensic accountants certified it yesterday." "Good." I closed the folder. I set it on top of the other two. 3 folders, 5 years, $612,000, 43 minutes of footage, 4 pages of transcript, a dismissed petition, and a fabricated doctor's letter. The case my son had built against me had been constructed entirely from lies. The case building itself against him was constructed entirely from facts. "What comes next?" Wallace asked. I thought of Claire, of her content, her curated mornings, her performed domestic happiness. I thought of the 14,000 people who had already seen a fragment of the truth in that neighbor's security camera footage. 14,000 was just the beginning, I said quietly. The rest of the world is about to see a great deal more. I watched it for the first time on a Wednesday morning, sitting on the edge of the bed in my hotel room, with my reading glasses on and the phone held in both hands. Wallace had sent the link at 6:42 a.m., with a single line of text beneath it. "You should see this before you hear about it from anyone else." The clip was 47 seconds long. It had been filmed from the second floor of the brownstone directly across from the Beacon Hill mansion, a neighbor's front-facing security camera, the kind that runs continuously and stores footage in the cloud. Someone had clipped those 47 seconds, sharpened the audio with basic editing software, and posted it to a community social media group the previous evening. By the time Wallace sent it to me, it had been shared 800 times and viewed by 61,000 people. I pressed play. The angle was slightly elevated, looking down at the front steps of the mansion. The morning was overcast. This was the 6th of October, the morning I left. You could see the front door. You could see Claire standing on the top step in her silk robe, phone in hand, filming something inside the house. And then 22 seconds in, you could hear Daniel's voice coming through the open doorway, clear enough, sharp enough, carrying across the street to a neighbor's microphone, with the particular carrying quality of a man who was not worried about being overheard. "Either get on your knees and apologize to my wife, or get out of my house." Then a silence of about 4 seconds. Then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps crossing hardwood. Then the front door opened, and I walked out, a 72-year-old man in a winter coat with a leather suitcase in his hand, moving with the quiet dignity of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is at peace with it. The clip ended there. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hands, and the room very still around me. My chest hurt. Not the dull ache I had grown accustomed to over the past 2 weeks. This was sharper, more immediate, the pain of hearing my son's voice say those words in a stranger's recording, stripped of all context and delivered to 61,000 people simultaneously. "Get on your knees." 47 seconds. That was all it took for 2 years and 11 months of accumulated indignity to become a public fact. One tear came, just one, slow and deliberate, as everything else I had done in the past 3 weeks, and I let it reach my jaw before I wiped it away. There was no reason to hide it. Nobody was watching. Then I breathed. Then I called Wallace. "I saw it," I said when he picked up. "Are you all right?" His voice was careful, searching. "Tell me where it stands," I said, because I needed information more than comfort. Comfort could come later. Right now, I needed to understand the shape of what was happening. As of 6 a.m., 61,000 views, Wallace said. "By the time we finish this call, it will be more. 3 journalists have already reached out to my office asking for comment. I've declined all 3. The clip has been picked up by 2 local news aggregators and 1 national lifestyle publication that covers influencer culture." Claire's response: she posted at 11 last night a statement on her platform. She said the clip was taken out of context, that it represented a private family disagreement that had been misrepresented by people who didn't understand her family's dynamic. Wallace's tone was clinically neutral. "The comments beneath her post are significant." "How significant?" "Her comment section has received 42,000 responses in 8 hours. The ratio of negative to supportive is approximately 14-1. A pause. 3 of her remaining sponsors have issued statements this morning. Radiance Skincare terminated their contract at midnight. Their statement cited a violation of their brand values clause. Morning Bloom Wellness followed at 4 a.m. The third sponsor, a home goods company called Hearth and Haven, posted a statement 20 minutes ago saying they are, quote, "deeply troubled by the content of the circulating video and are reviewing their partnership immediately." I stood up from the bed. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, not from physical weakness, but from the sheer accumulated weight of the past 17 days pressing down through my feet into the floor. I walked to the window. Boston was overcast this morning, the sky the color of old pewter, the Charles River visible in the distance as a dark ribbon between the buildings. "She built an empire on the image of a gracious home," I said. My voice was rough at the edges. She dropped those shoes on my kitchen floor and walked away, and a camera across the street recorded what her home actually sounded like. "Arthur." Wallace's voice shifted quieter now, the professional register dropping half an octave toward something more human. "I want you to know something. The public response to this clip, the comments, the shares, the outrage, none of it is manufactured. These are real people who watched 47 seconds of a 72-year-old man walk out of his son's house with a suitcase, and they were angry on your behalf." My throat closed entirely. I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and held them there for a long moment. 61,000 people. Strangers who had never met me, who didn't know my name or my history or the 3 decades of work that had built the house Daniel had told me to leave, and they had watched 47 seconds and felt instinctively that something deeply wrong had occurred. Margaret had always said that people know the truth when they see it, even if they can't articulate it. She had believed that with a conviction that sometimes exasperated me in its simplicity. Standing at that window watching the pewter sky over Boston, I was ashamed of every moment I had doubted her. "What does Daniel know about the clip?" I asked, pulling myself back. "He's aware. He called the original poster and demanded the video be taken down. The poster declined. He then contacted the social media platform directly. The platform reviewed it and determined the clip falls under public interest documentation since it captures events visible from a public street." Wallace allowed himself a small, dry sound that was almost a laugh. "His attorney sent a cease and desist this morning. It arrived 4 hours after the clip had already been picked up nationally." "A cease and desist," I said, "against a neighbor's security camera footage. His attorney is going to earn every dollar of that retainer," Wallace said. I actually laughed at that, a short, involuntary sound that surprised me entirely. It lasted only a moment, but it was real. The first genuine laugh I had produced in 17 days, and it came from the absurdity of my son threatening legal action against a camera that had simply done what cameras do. "Michael," I said when the moment had passed, "Claire's contracts, is it over for her professionally?" Wallace considered the question, with the honesty I had always valued in him. Her primary revenue streams are gone. She might rebuild a smaller audience over time. People have come back from worse in that industry. But the brand she built, the aspirational domestic perfection, the gracious home, the curated family life. He stopped. That specific brand is finished. You can't recover that image once 61,000 people have heard your husband tell your elderly father-in-law to get on his knees. I turned away from the window. The room felt very large and very quiet. There's something you need to come in for tomorrow, Wallace said, his voice returning to its professional register. I found something in the discovery materials from the forensic review. Something about Daniel's career that I think you need to hear in person. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of something? The kind, Wallace said carefully, that changes the story Daniel has been telling himself about who he is. I went to Wallace's office the next afternoon, carrying a weight I couldn't name yet. The particular unease of a man who has been told that what he's about to hear will change something, but doesn't know which something or how completely. Wallace was standing when I walked in, which he rarely did. He had his reading glasses in his hand rather than on his face, turning them slowly by one arm, a habit I had learned to recognize as his version of nervous energy, the thing his hands did when his mind was working faster than the conversation around him. "Sit down, Arthur," he said. Then almost immediately, "Actually, before you sit down, I want to show you something." He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was an email thread. The header showed an internal company address. The date stamp read September 14th, 2019, and the subject line was 3 words, Bennett referral. I sat down slowly. My eyes moved to the first message in the thread. It was from James Harrington. The James Harrington, managing partner of Meridian Capital Group, the man whose team had come down 3 elevator floors to greet me in the lobby of 1 Federal Street. A man I had known for 22 years, had done business with across 4 property developments, had once had Thanksgiving dinner with when his own family was snowbound in Vermont, and he happened to be in Boston. The email read, "James, as discussed, I'm happy to bring Daniel in for the senior creative director role. Out of respect for Arthur, I'll make sure the process looks competitive. He's a bright enough kid. Whether he's right for the position is a separate question, but Arthur asked, and I don't say no to Arthur Bennett. Please proceed with the paperwork." I read it twice. Then I read it a 3rd time, more slowly, making sure I had not misunderstood a single word. "Who is James writing to?" I asked. My voice came out very quiet. "His operations director," Wallace said. He was watching me carefully, the glasses still turning in his hand. The reply below it is from the operations director, confirming that the offer letter would be prepared and the other candidates in the pipeline would be, and I'm quoting, "gracefully redirected." I leaned back in the chair. My hands rested in my lap, and I looked at them for a moment. The hands of a 72-year-old man, the knuckles a little thickened, the skin a little loose, hands that had held wrenches and blueprints, and my wife's hand at the end of her life. Hands that had apparently also quietly arranged the career of a son who had spent 5 years believing he had built something on his own. "I asked James for that favor," I said. It wasn't a question. "In August of 2019, Wallace confirmed. 3 weeks before Daniel's interview. I found the email because the forensic team pulled all correspondence between Meridian accounts and any Bennett-associated address during the 5-year review period. This thread came up in the sweep." He set his glasses down on the desk. "Arthur, did you know Daniel didn't know?" The question hit me somewhere soft and unguarded. My eyes went hot immediately, the burning that I had come to recognize as the body's first warning before something deeper arrived. I blinked it back. "I assumed he suspected," I said slowly. "The way children suspect things they don't want to confirm. I thought if he performed well enough in the role, it wouldn't matter how the door opened." I stopped, swallowed. He performed adequately. He wasn't exceptional, but he was adequate. and I told myself that was enough. He's held that position for 5 years, Wallace said. He's listed it on every document he's filed, including the guardianship petition, as evidence of his professional standing and financial independence. A pause. He told the court he was a self-made professional man. I pressed my fist against my mouth. Hard. The knuckles dug into my lips and I held it there for 3 full seconds, while something moved through my chest that was too large and too complicated to have a single name. Grief, yes. Anger, yes. But underneath both of those, something worse, the specific devastation of a parent who recognizes in a moment of terrible clarity that their act of love has become the architecture of their child's delusion. I had opened that door because I loved him, because I wanted him to have a good life, a solid footing, something to stand on. I had called in a favor with a man I trusted and asked him to give my son a chance. And Daniel had walked through that door and built an entire identity on the belief that he had opened it himself. "He doesn't know," I said. My voice broke on the last word, not dramatically, but honestly, the way old wood gives under sustained weight. He genuinely doesn't know. He's been walking around for 5 years, believing he earned that position on his own merit. "No," Wallace said gently. "He doesn't know." I stood up abruptly, not from anger, but from the physical inability to stay still inside that understanding. I walked to the window. My legs were not entirely steady. I put one hand against the window frame and gripped it. Outside, Boylston Street was doing what Boylston Street always did in late October, moving fast, collars turned up, everyone with somewhere to be. The trees along the sidewalk stripped nearly bare by 3 days of wind. An ordinary Thursday afternoon in a city that had no knowledge of and no interest in the conversation happening 4 floors above its head. "Does he need to know?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. Wallace joined me at the window, standing a respectful distance to my left. "That's your decision to make," he said. "Not mine. I thought of Daniel at 28, the year he had come to me nervous and trying to hide it, and told me he wanted to move into the creative industry. I had listened. I had nodded. I had said encouragingly, "Let me see what I can do." He had interpreted that as a general parental blessing. He had not understood it as a literal statement of intent. I thought of him at 37, accepting his 5th-year performance review, shaking hands with James Harrington's operations director, walking out of that building with his chest expanded and his chin level, and the private sustaining belief that he had done this himself. "Yes," I said. "He needs to know." My voice had steadied not from absence of pain, but from the decision itself, which always carried its own particular weight and its own particular clarity. Not to humiliate him, not as punishment. I turned away from the window and faced Wallace directly. Because he cannot build anything real on a foundation he doesn't know is borrowed. And because I am done, I am completely done watching my son live inside a story that isn't true. Wallace held my gaze. His expression was steady and serious, and beneath both of those things genuinely moved. "When?" he asked. "Soon," I said. "But not yet. There are things he still needs to see first." I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. My hands were trembling slightly as I put it on, and I did not try to hide it from Wallace, because there was no point anymore in hiding the cost of any of this from the one man who had seen all of it. "One more thing, Michael," I said, pausing at the door. "Yes, when we sit down with Daniel, all of it comes out. The trust records, the career, the footage, the map." I looked at him steadily. "Everything. He gets the full truth, every page of it." Wallace nodded. "Every page," he said. I walked out into this corridor and pressed the elevator button and waited my reflection ghostly in the polished metal doors, an old man in a winter coat standing very straight in a hallway that smelled of law books and recirculated air, carrying more than any hallway should reasonably be asked to hold. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a corner table in a small Cambridge coffee shop called Ardmore's, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and exposed brick, and the smell of dark roast so thick in the air, it felt like weather. I had chosen it because it was 7 blocks from the Liberty, and because neither of us had any history with it. Neutral ground, a place where neither of us could retreat into the comfort of familiar territory. He looked up when I walked in. Something moved across his face, not the arrogance I had grown accustomed to, not the calculated pleasantness he wore when he needed something. Something rawer than either of those. He looked for the first time in years like my son. He had lost weight in 3 weeks. His jaw was sharper, the skin beneath his eyes shadowed with the particular grayness of a man who had not slept cleanly in some time. He was wearing a plain, dark jacket, no pressed linen, no performed elegance. Just a man sitting in a coffee shop, waiting for a conversation he had no idea how to prepare for. I sat down across from him. I did not smile. I did not perform ease I did not feel. I set my coat on the chair beside me and folded my hands on the table and looked at my son directly. "You called me," I said, "so talk." Daniel's jaw worked for a moment. He curled both hands around his coffee cup, and I could see his fingers pressing white against the ceramic knuckles, prominent the grip of a man holding on to the only solid thing within reach. "I don't know where to start," he said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual polish. The voice of a man who had rehearsed several versions of this conversation and abandoned all of them. "Start with what's true," I said. "That'll narrow it down considerably." He flinched. Not dramatically, a small, involuntary contraction around the eyes. Then he looked at the table, then back up at me. "The accounts," he said. "The house, the car." He stopped, started again. "Was all of it, was everything we had, was it all yours?" "Every dollar," I said. "Every month, every utility bill and grocery order and lease payment, for 5 years. I kept my voice level, not cold level. There was a difference and I needed Daniel to feel it. "You want to know the number?" He swallowed. His Adam's apple moved visibly. "Tell me." $612,000, I said. "That is what the Bennett Family Trust spent on your household and Claire's business over the past 5 years. While you were telling a judge I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs." The color left Daniel's face so completely that for a moment I was genuinely concerned. His hands released the coffee cup. He pressed both palms flat on the table as though he needed it to hold him upright. "Dad," he started. "I'm not finished," I said. Not harshly, but firmly, because there was something else he needed to know, and I had carried it for 3 weeks, and the weight of it was no longer something I was willing to bear alone. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and took out a photograph. It was 4 inches by 6, black and white, slightly faded at the edges. A photograph Margaret had taken in the summer of 1991 on a Sunday afternoon in the backyard of our first house in Dorchester. In it, a 7-year-old Daniel was sitting on the back steps in his Sunday church clothes, head bent with intense concentration, polishing a pair of black dress shoes with a cloth and a tin of shoe polish. My shoes. I had been running late for a meeting, and he had seen me struggling with the time and had simply taken the shoes from my hands without being asked and said with complete 7-year-old seriousness, "I'll do it, Dad. You go get ready." I set the photograph on the table between us. Daniel looked down at it, and the sound that came out of him, I was not prepared for it, even though I had carried that photograph for this exact moment. It was not a word. It was not a sob. It was something that started in his chest and came out broken and formless, a sound that a grown man makes when something inside him cracks along a fault line that has been forming for years. His shoulders collapsed forward. His hands came up and covered his face. And then Daniel Bennett, 42 years old, senior creative director, A man who had stood in a bank and called his father mentally incompetent wept. Not quietly, not with any pretense of composure. He wept the way a person weeps when they have been holding something back for so long that the release of it has no shape, no dignity, and no end in sight. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged, tearing intervals. He pressed his hands harder against his face as though he could contain it, and he could not. I did not move. I did not reach across the table. I let it happen because it needed to happen, and because there was no way to abbreviate the grief of a man who is meeting the truth about himself for the first time. After a long while, 2 minutes, perhaps 3, Daniel lowered his hands. His face was devastated. His eyes were swollen and red, his cheeks wet, his lips pressed together in the expression of a man trying to reassemble himself from pieces. "I was 7, he said. His voice was wrecked, barely audible. "I remember that day. You were so stressed. I wanted to help you." He looked at the photograph, and something in his expression broke open all over again, a fresh wave of grief that he rode through with his jaw clenched and his eyes overflowing. "What happened to me, Dad? What happened?" My own throat tightened so severely that for a moment I could not speak. My eyes burned and filled, and I let them sitting in a Cambridge coffee shop with my son's tears on the table between us, and 30 years of love and failure and silence finally finding the air it needed. "I don't know," I said honestly. My voice was barely more than a breath. "I've asked myself that every day for 3 weeks, maybe longer." I reached out, then slowly, deliberately, and placed my hand over his on the table. His hand turned under mine and gripped it. Hard. The grip of a 7-year-old boy in a 42-year-old man's hand. "But I think it started the day you stopped being curious about where things came from." Daniel's shoulders heaved once more. He pressed his free hand over his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out shattered, jagged, more breath than voice. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I held his hand and said nothing else, because some things, when they finally arrive, don't need a response. They just need to be received. Outside, Ardmore's Cambridge continued its Saturday morning without us. And inside, a father and son sat with the photograph of a 7-year-old boy and the long, difficult, necessary work of beginning again. Wallace's conference room was on the 4th floor of the Back Bay building, a long rectangular space with a mahogany table and windows that looked out over the rooftops toward the Charles. I had been in that room dozens of times over 30 years. I had signed partnership agreements there, reviewed property closings, sat through the reading of Margaret's own will on a gray February morning 2 years ago with Daniel at my side, and both of us pretending we were holding together better than we were. Today, Daniel sat across from me at the far end of the table. He had showered and changed since Saturday, dark trousers, a gray sweater, no tie. His eyes were still slightly swollen at the edges, the faint remnant of a man who had cried for the first time in perhaps a decade and had not fully recovered the architecture of his composure. He was holding a glass of water in both hands and watching Wallace arrange documents at the head of the table with the expression of a man sitting in a waiting room outside a surgery he cannot postpone. Wallace cleared his throat and sat down. "I want to begin," Wallace said, "by explaining what this document is and why we are here today." He opened the folder in front of him. "On the 15th of February, 2025, 8 months ago, Arthur came to this office and executed a comprehensive revision of his last will and testament. The document was witnessed by 2 members of this firm and notarized by a Massachusetts licensed notary. It is fully valid and legally binding." He looked at Daniel directly. "This is not a surprise reading. Arthur wanted you to hear it while he was in the room. That was his specific instruction." Daniel's grip on the water glass tightened. He looked at me. I held his gaze steadily. "February," Daniel said. His voice was careful, controlled in a way that cost him visible effort. You revised your will in February. I did, I said. That's 8 months before. He stopped himself. His jaw worked. You were planning this for 8 months. Longer, I said. I've been planning how to protect what I built for 30 years. February was when I finalized the last details. I leaned forward slightly. Daniel, everything I'm about to let Wallace read to you, I need you to understand. It was written not out of anger. I wrote it in February, before the shoes, before the lawsuit, before any of it. I held his eyes. This is what I intended all along. Something shifted in Daniel's face, a complicated movement of understanding and grief crossing each other like two weather systems meeting. He set the water glass down. He nodded once very slightly, as though he needed to anchor himself before the next wave arrived. Wallace began to read. The revised Bennett estate plan consists of 3 primary instruments, he said. First, the Bennett Family Trust, currently valued at approximately $4.3 million in liquid and managed assets, will be transitioned to a charitable remainder trust upon Arthur's passing. The named beneficiary organization is the Margaret Bennett Foundation, a non-profit entity, Arthur Incorporated, in March of this year, established to provide housing stability resources and vocational training for at-risk families in the greater Boston area. Daniel drew a slow, deliberate breath through his nose. His hands had flattened on the table. Second instrument, Wallace continued. The Bennett Heritage Complex, the South End property currently assessed at $41.3 million, will remain in Bennett Heritage, LLC during Arthur's lifetime. Upon Arthur's passing, the property will be transferred in full to the Margaret Bennett Foundation as its primary endowment asset. The rental income from the complex will fund the foundation's operational programs in perpetuity. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, a single pigeon landed on the rooftop ledge opposite and sat there with the unconcerned dignity of something that has no stake in human decisions. Daniel's eyes had gone glassy. He was not crying, not yet, but the line between composure and its absence was visibly thin. His throat moved repeatedly, the swallowing reflex working hard against something that had no physical form. Third instrument, Wallace said, and here his voice shifted almost imperceptibly, a half-note lower, careful in a way that suggested he understood the weight of what he was about to read. The Beacon Hill property, the family residence on Chestnut Street, currently held by the Bennett Family Trust, will be listed for sale at market value no later than January 1, 2026. The net proceeds will be divided equally between the Margaret Bennett Foundation and the establishment of the Margaret Bennett Memorial Scholarship, to be administered through Boston University's School of Social Work, providing full tuition funding to 2 students per year with demonstrated financial need. Daniel made a sound. Just one short and compressed a sound, like the very beginning of something that he immediately locked down behind his teeth. His eyes were wet now, openly without pretense. He pressed his lips together so hard they went pale. The Beacon Hill house, he said. His voice was barely functional. You're selling it. Yes, I said. Margaret's house. Margaret's house that I built, I said. That I refinished and painted and planted and paid for every month for 26 years. That I moved into as a room at the back with a window facing an alley. My voice held steadily, carefully, because I had rehearsed this in the Liberty at 5 in the morning for 3 consecutive days. I'm not selling it to punish you, Daniel. I'm selling it because the Margaret Bennett Foundation needs capital to do real work in this city. Because your mother would have wanted her name on something that helped people who were struggling the way we struggled when we were young. I stopped. She never cared about the house. She cared about what we did inside it. Daniel's chin dropped to his chest. Both hands came up and pressed against the back of his skull, elbows on the table, the posture of a man absorbing a blow that came from a direction he could not have anticipated. A sound escaped him, low, involuntary aching, and then another, and his shoulders began to shake again, with the quiet, helpless rhythm of a man who has already spent his tears and is discovering he has more. "There is a fourth element," Wallace said gently, but without delay. "A personal bequest separate from the estate instruments. It will be delivered physically." He looked at me. I nodded. "But not today," I said. "That comes when the time is right." Daniel looked up at me from behind his hands. His face was destroyed, red-eyed, wet-cheeked, hollowed out by the particular grief of a man who has just understood fully and irreversibly the size of what he almost threw away. "Dad," he said, "what do I do now?" I looked at my son, really looked at him the way I hadn't been able to in years, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. But the first tentative movement toward it, like a door that has been sealed for a long time, beginning very slowly to open. "You start," I said, by telling the truth. 2 nights after the will reading, I sat alone at the small desk in my hotel room and wrote a letter to my son. Not the legal kind. Not a document with witnesses and notary seals and the formal weight of 30 years of careful planning behind it. Just a letter. Paper and pen, and the particular quiet of a Wednesday night in late October, when the wind off the Charles had picked up and was pressing itself against the windows of the Liberty with a low, persistent sound like something asking to be let in. I had been thinking about what to write for 3 weeks. Longer, if I was honest. I had been composing this letter in the back of my mind since the morning I packed the leather suitcase and walked out the front door, maybe even before that. In the small hours of nights when the house on Beacon Hill was dark and quiet, and I lay awake in my narrow back room, listening to the buildings settle around me, and trying to understand how a life built on love had arrived at a place that felt so much like its opposite. I opened the desk drawer and took out the small parcel I had prepared that afternoon. The cloth was not much to look at. 4 inches by 6. Cotton cream-colored, the kind sold in any hardware store for $1.50. I had bought it at a shop on Washington Street the previous week, washed it once so the stiffness was gone, folded it into a neat square, and set it on the desk where I could look at it while I decided what to say. Margaret would have laughed at me. She would have stood in the doorway of whatever room I was being serious in, and said in that voice she used when I was overthinking something obvious, "Arthur James Bennett, it's a piece of cloth. Write the letter and go to bed." And then she would have come in anyway and sat on the edge of the bed and listened while I worked through it out loud, because that was who she was, the woman who teased you for your seriousness and then stayed up until midnight to help you carry it. I pressed my hand flat over the folded cloth for a moment. The cotton was soft under my palm. Then I picked up the pen. I wrote slowly. Not because I didn't know what to say, the words had been inside me long enough that they no longer needed searching, but because I wanted every letter to be legible, every sentence to be clear. Daniel was going to read this, and I wanted him to read the handwriting of a man who was steady, who had not been broken by any of this, even in the moments when it had cost him everything he had. "Daniel, I found this cloth in the drawer of my workbench the summer you were 7 years old. You used it to polish my shoes on a Sunday morning when I was running late and didn't ask for help, and you gave it anyway. I kept it because your mother saw me looking at it that evening and said, 'Keep that. You'll want it someday.' She was right. She was usually right. This cloth is the only thing I am leaving you from my personal effects. Not because you deserve less, but because it is worth more than everything else I own put together. It is the proof that the person you were at 7 years old is still inside you. I have been waiting 35 years for him to come back. I spent $600,000 keeping a roof over your head and never asked for a single word of thanks. I'm not asking now. What I'm asking is simpler and harder than gratitude. I'm asking you to remember what you knew at 7, that a man of dignity does not wait to be asked before he helps. That real strength is not in what you own or what you control or what you can make someone else do it, is in what you give freely without keeping score. You asked me last Saturday what happened to you. I told you I didn't know. That was only half true. I think what happened was that you stopped polishing shoes and started counting them. Come back from that. It's not too late. It is never too late for a man who is still breathing and still capable of shame, and you proved last Saturday that you are both. The cloth is yours. What you do with it is yours. Your father, Arthur. I set the pen down. My hand was trembling finely across the knuckles, that small, persistent tremor that had been visiting me more frequently in recent weeks. The body's way of reminding me that 72 years is not a small number. I looked at the letter for a long moment. Then I read it back from the beginning word by word, the way Margaret had taught me to read anything important slowly without rushing toward the end. When I finished, my eyes were full. Not overflowing full, and still the way deep water is still. I blinked once, and the fullness held. I folded the letter in thirds. I placed it on top of the cloth. I wrapped both inside a single sheet of brown paper, the plain kind, no ribbon, no box, and folded the edges neatly and pressed the creases flat with the heel of my hand. On the outside of the parcel, in the same careful handwriting, I wrote one word, Daniel. Then I set it on the corner of the desk and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I sat for a while and listened to the wind working at the windows. I thought about the brass anniversary clock still sitting on the desk in Suite 3C, its pendulum keeping time through every event of the past month with the patient indifference of a well-made thing. I thought about Margaret, at 29, standing in the doorway of our first apartment in Dorchester, holding a newborn Daniel against her shoulder, and looking at me with an expression I had never been able to fully describe, something between exhaustion and a joy so complete it had no need for performance. "Don't mess this up, Arthur," she had said, and she was smiling when she said it, and I had laughed because I was 29 and terrified, and the baby had just stopped crying, and the whole world felt briefly gloriously possible. I had not messed it up. Not entirely. Not yet. The man in Suite 3C who had drawn maps and built trusts and called in quiet favors and sat for 4 hours of neurological testing, on a gray March morning, that man had not messed it up. He had built something real. He had loved his son imperfectly and completely, and had not stopped even when love asked him to do the hardest thing it ever asks, to step back and let the consequences arrive. Outside, the wind eased for a moment. The windows went quiet. I picked up the parcel from the corner of the desk and held it in both hands. This small brown package, lighter than anything that had cost this much, and I said out loud to the room, to the dark, to Margaret, wherever she was, "I think we're going to be all right." The sale closed on the 12th of December. I wasn't there when it happened. The night before, Thomas drove me past it, once a single slow pass along Chestnut Street, the headlights sweeping across the limestone facade, the iron fence, Margaret's hydrangeas standing bare and skeletal in the winter cold. I didn't ask him to stop. I said goodbye the way you say goodbye to something that has been both a home and a wound, at the same time, quietly, without ceremony, without performance, knowing in your bones that it was finally time to let go. 8 days later, on a Saturday morning, I called Daniel. "Meet me on Charles Street," I said. 11 o'clock. There's a shop called Beaumont's. You'll find it between the hardware store and the florist. Look for the clock in the window. He was there at 10:53, his collar turned up against the bitter December cold, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. When I stepped out of the car, something moved across his face, relief and apprehension, arriving together, the way they always do when a thing you have been both dreading and hoping for in equal measure finally appears before you. The two emotions don't cancel each other out. They arrive as one. "Dad," he said. "Daniel," I said. We went inside. Beaumont's clock and watch repair had occupied the same narrow storefront for 41 years. Gerald Beaumont, 70 years old, white-haired with the deep, unhurried patience of a man who had spent his entire life working with mechanisms that simply cannot be rushed, looked up from behind the counter and nodded with quiet recognition. "Mr. Bennett, right on time." The shop smelled of machine oil and old wood, and the particular sweetness that comes from 100 clocks keeping their time simultaneously in one small room. The walls were lined with them pocket watches, mantel clocks, carriage clocks, a tall grandfather clock standing in the corner like a dignified old man. The sound was not noise, it was rhythm. Layer upon layer of ticking, each mechanism slightly offset from the others, creating a texture of time that felt almost organic, almost like breathing. Standing inside it was like standing inside something alive. I reached into my coat and took out the brown paper parcel. I had wrapped it 7 weeks earlier sitting at the desk in my room at the Liberty Hotel, and I had carried it with me for 8 days, waiting for the right morning to present itself. This was the right morning. I had known it when I woke up. I held the parcel out to Daniel. He looked at his name on the outside, just one word written in my handwriting. His throat moved. His hands were not steady when he reached out and took it from me. He opened it carefully, with the deliberate care of a man who understands instinctively that what he is holding is not ordinary. He found the cloth first, folded neatly inside. Then he found the letter. He read it standing at the counter, while all 100 clocks kept their 100 separate rhythms around us. I watched his face the way you watch the face of someone you have known since before they had words. When he reached the line about counting shoes instead of polishing them, his chin dropped and then recovered a small private collapse, quickly gathered back. When he reached the words, "Your father Arthur," his eyes overflowed, 2 clean lines running down his face that he did not wipe away, as though he had made a decision. This time that he would not pretend the grief was not sitting right there in the open between us. "I don't know how to fix what I did," he said. His voice was wrecked and honest and entirely without pretense. "You can't fix it," I said. "That's not how it works. You don't fix the past, Daniel. The past doesn't get fixed. What you do is build something different on top of it slowly, carefully, without stopping when it becomes difficult, without walking away when it demands more than you feel you have." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "And you start today. Not tomorrow. Today." He reached up and gripped my hand with the full, desperate strength of a man who has finally found the one solid thing in a room that has been shaking for years beneath his feet. He held on the way men hold on when they have stopped caring whether it looks like holding on. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, Dad." Gerald caught my eye from the far end of the counter. He said nothing. He only smiled, small, private, the smile of a man who has seen enough of life to know a significant moment when it stands quietly in his shop, and then looked back down at his work, giving us the dignity of the distance. I was 72 years old. I had buried a wife, built a trust from what remained, and carried a letter folded inside a brown paper parcel in my coat pocket for 8 days, waiting for the right morning and the right room and the right version of my son to hand it to. The parcel had contained a piece of cotton cloth worth almost nothing in money and meaning everything that I had spent years failing to find the right moment to say out loud. It was standing there among all those ticking clocks with my hand on my son's shoulder and his hand gripping mine exactly enough. Not more than enough, not less. Exactly enough, the way the right things when they finally arrive always are. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung left, right, left, patient and unhurried, and certain, keeping perfect time for no one in particular, and all of us at once. Looking back at everything that happened, Arthur Bennett, will not pretend I was the hero of this story. I was a father who loved his son in all the wrong ways. I opened doors instead of teaching him how to knock. I paid every bill instead of teaching him what a dollar truly costs. I stayed quiet for far too long, and that silence became as much a part of the problem as anything Daniel ever did. So don't be like me. Don't wait until someone tells you to get on your knees before you decide to stand up straight. If someone in your family is treating you like a stranger in your own home, act sooner than I did. Dignity is not something you protect in secret. It is something you declare clearly and early before the cost of silence becomes too high to pay. I believe God does not allow an honest man to permanently lose what he genuinely deserves. He simply changes the way it finds its way back. And family justice does not arrive through courtrooms or bank accounts alone. It arrives in the moment when the truth is finally spoken out loud, however late, however painful. This is a story about a father, a revenge dad, who chose dignity over destruction, patience over anger, and love fierce enough to let go. Because real revenge dad energy is not about winning, it is about refusing to disappear. And true family justice is not built on power. It is built on the courage to tell the truth even when it costs you everything. If this story of revenge, dad, and family justice moved something in you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you genuinely deeply for staying until the very last word. That means more to me than you know. A note before you go: the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for the purpose of storytelling and life reflection. If that is not what you are looking for right now, that is perfectly fine. Choose what serves you best. I will be here whenever you are ready to return.